So let's talk about 2024. What happened with the left? What happened with Biden? What's your take on Biden?
Biden is I try to remove myself from it, and I try not to give like big history takes while you're in the moment. But it's really hard not to say that he's one of the worst presidents in modern history. And I think the reason why I'm going to go with it is because I want to judge him by the things that he set out to do. So Joe Biden has been the same person for his entire political career. He is a basically C student who thinks he's an A student. The chip on his shoulder against the elites has played to his benefit in his original election to the United States Senate, through his entire career as a United States Senator, where he always wanted to be the star and the center of attention, and to his 1988 presidential campaign. And one of the most fascinating things about Biden and watching him age is watching him become even more of what he already was. And so, book recommendation, it's called What It Takes. And it was written in 1988. And there's actually a long chapter on Joe Biden and about the plagiarism scandal. And one of the things that comes across is his sheer arrogance and belief in himself as to why he should be the center of attention. Now, the reason I'm laying all this out is the arrogance of Joe Biden, the individual and his character, is fundamentally the reason his presidency went awry. This is a person who was elected in 2020 really because of a feeling of chaos, of Donald Trump, of we need normalcy, decides to come into the office, portrays himself as a quote-unquote transitional president, slowly, begins to lose a lot of his faculties, and then surrounds himself with sycophants, the same ones who have been around him for so long, that he had no single input into his life to tell him that he needed to stop and he needed to drop out of the race until it became truly undeniable to the vast majority of the American people. And that's why I'm trying to keep it as like him as an individual, as a president, because we could separate him from some of his accomplishments and the things that happened. Some I support, some I don't. But generally, a lot of people are not going to look back and think about Joe Biden and the CHIPS Act. A lot of people are not going to look back and think about Joe Biden and the Build Back Better bill or whatever, his Lena Khan antitrust policy. They're going to look back on him and they're going to remember high inflation. They're going to remember somebody who fundamentally never was up to the job, in the sense that, again, book recommendation, Freedom from Fear by David Kennedy, is about the Roosevelt years. And one of the most important things people don't understand is the New Deal didn't really work in the way that a lot of people wanted it to, right? Like, there was still high unemployment. There was still a lot of suffering. But you know what changed? They felt that they had a vigorous commander-in-chief who was doing everything in his power to attack the problems of the everyday American. So even though things didn't even materially change, the vigor, that's a term that was often associated with John F. Kennedy at Vigor, in the Massachusetts accent. We had this young, vibrant president in 1960, and he was running around and he wanted to convince us that he was working every single day tirelessly. And when you have an 80-year-old man who is simply just eating ice cream and going to the beach while people's grocery prices and all this thing go up by 25%, and we don't see the same vigor, we don't see the same action, the bias to action, which is so important in the modern presidency. That is fundamentally why I think the Democrats, part of the reason why the Democrats lost the election, and also why I think that he missed his moment in such a dramatic way. And he had the opportunity. He could have done it, if he wanted to, but maybe 20 years ago. But the truth is that his own narcissism, his own misplaced belief in himself, and his own accidental rise to the presidency ended up in his downfall. And it's kind of amazing because, again, if we look back to his original campaign speech, 2019, why I'm running for president. It was Charlottesville, and he said, I want to defeat Donald Trump forever, and I want to make sure that he never gets back in the White House again. So by his own metric, he did fail. It was the only thing he wanted to do, and he failed from.
You said a lot of interesting stuff. Yeah. So one, FDR, that's really interesting. It's not about the specific policy. It's about like fighting for the people and doing that with charisma and just uniting the entire country for a particular. This is the same with Bernie. Like maybe there's a lot of people that disagree with Bernie that still support him because like we just want
feels
somebody
authentic. That's it.
We just want somebody to fight authentically for us.
Yes, FDR. People really need. FDR was like a king. He was like Jesus Christ. Okay, in the U.S. and some of it was because of what he did, but it was just the fight. So people need to go back and read the history of the first 100 days under FDR, the sheer amount of legislation that went through, his ability to bring Congress to heel and the Senate. He gets all this stuff through. But as you and I know, legislation takes a long time to put into place, right? We've had people starving on the streets all throughout 1933 under Hoover. The difference was Hoover was seen as this do-nothing joke who would dine 9-course meals in the White House, and he was a filthy rich banker. FDR comes in there, and every single day has fireside chats. He's passing legislation, but more importantly, so he tries various different programs. Then they get ruled unconstitutional. He tries even more. So what does America take away from that? Every single time, if he gets knocked down, he comes back fighting. And that was a really part of his character that he developed after he got polio, and it gave him the strength to persevere through personally what he could transfer in his calm demeanor and his feeling of fight, that America really got that spirit from him and was able to climb itself out of the Great Depression. He's such an inspirational figure. He really is. And people think of him for World War II. And of course, we can spend forever on that. But in my opinion, the early years are not studied enough. 33 to 37 is one of the most remarkable periods in American history. We were not ruled by a president. We were ruled by a king, by a monarch, and people liked it. He was a dictator, and he was a good one.
Yeah. So to sort of push back against the implied thing that you said. So
Sure.
when saying Biden is the worst president.
No, second worst. In modern history, that's what I said. Second
in
worst.
modern history, who's the worst?
W, with no question.
I see, because of the horrible wars, probably.
I mean, Iraq is just so bad.
It's just a mess, yeah.
One of my favorite authors is a guy, Gene Edward Smith. He's written a bunch of presidential biographies. And in the opening of his W biography, he's like, there's just no question. There's a single worst foreign policy mistake in all of American history. And W is one of our worst presidents ever. He had terrible judgment and it got us into a war of his own choosing. It was a disaster, and it set us up for failure. By the way, we talked a lot about Donald Trump. Nobody is more responsible for the rise of Donald Trump than George W. Bush. But I could go off on Bush for a long time.
Oh, we will.
Yeah.
We'll return there. So as part of the pushback, I'd like to say, because I agree with your criticism of arrogance and narcissism against Joe Biden, the same could be said about Donald Trump.
You're absolutely
of
right.
arrogance.
Yeah.
So, and I think you've also articulated that a lot of presidents throughout American history have suffered from a bad case of arrogance and narcissism.
Absolutely, but it's sometimes to our benefit. You have to be a pretty crazy person to be to want to be president. I had put out a tweet that got some controversy, and I think it was Joe Rogan, who I love, but he was like, "I want to find out who Kamala Harris is as a human being," and I was like, "I'm actually not interested in who politicians are as human beings at all." I was like, "I've read too much about them to know." I know who you are. If you spend your life, and because I live in Washington and I spend a lot of time around would-be politicians, I know what it takes to actually become the president. It's crazy. You have to give up everything. Every night, you're not spending it with your wife. You're spending it at dinner with potential donors, with friends, with people who can connect you. Even after you get elected, that's even more so. Now you got to raise money, and now you're on to the next thing. Now you want to get your political thing through. You're going to spend all your time on your phone. You and your staff are going to be more like this. Your entire life revolves around your career. It's honestly, you need an insane level of narcissism to do it, because you have to believe that you are better than everybody else, which is already pretty crazy. And not only that, your own personal characteristics and foibles lead you to the pursuit of this office and to the pursuit of the idolatry of the self and everything around you. There's a famous story of Lady Bird Johnson after Johnson becomes the president. He's talking to the White House butler, and she was like, "Everything in this house revolves around my husband. Whatever's left goes to the girls, her 2 children, and I'll take the scraps." So everything revolved around Johnson's political career. And his daughters, when they're honest, because they like to paper over some of the things that happened under him, but they didn't spend any time with him. Saturday morning was for breakfast with, Richard Russell, I forget. These are all in the Robert A. Caro books. Sunday was for Rayburn. There was no time for his kids. That's what it was. And by the way, he's one of the greatest politicians to ever live. But he also died from a massive heart attack, and he was a deeply sad and depressed individual.
Yeah, I saw that tweet, to go back to that.
Yeah.
And also, I listened to your incredible debate about it with Marshall on the Realignment podcast, and I have to side with Marshall. I think you're just wrong on this.
All right.
Because I think revealing the character of a person is really important to understand how they will act in a room full of generals and full of...
this gets to the judgment question.
The judgment.
And I think of Johnson and of Nixon, of Teddy Roosevelt, even of FDR. I can give you a laundry list of personal problems that all those people had. I think they had really, really good judgment. And I'm not sure how intrinsic their own personal character was to their exploration and thinking about the world. So JFK might be our best example because he had the best judgment out of anybody in the room as a brand new president in the Cuban Missile Crisis. And he got us out and avoided nuclear war, which he deserves eternal credit for that. But how did he arrive to good judgment? Some of it certainly was his character, and we can go again though into his laundry list of that. But most of it was around being with his father, seeing some of the mistakes that he would make, and he was also had a deeply inquisitive mind, and he experienced World War II at the personal level after PT 109. So it is. Look, I get it. I actually could steel man it. I could. The response to what I'm saying is judgment is not divisible from personal character, but just because I know a lot of politicians and I've read enough with the really great ones, the people who I revere the most, there's really bad personal stuff basically every single time.
But you're saying the judgment was good.
Yeah, his judgment was great.
On
His
the Cuban
judgment was
Missile
great.
Crisis.
Yes.
Some of the best judgment and decision making in the history of America.
Yes, and we should study a lot of it. And I encourage people out there. This is a brutal text. We were forced to read it in graduate school. The Essence of Decision by Graham Allison. I'm so thankful we did. It's one of the foundations of political science because it lays out theories of how government works. This is also a useful transition, by the way, if we want to talk about Trump and some of his cabinet and how that is shaping up, because people really need to understand Washington. Washington is a creature with traditions, with institutions that don't care about you. They don't even really care about the president. They have self-perpetuating mechanisms which have been done a certain way, and it usually takes a great shocking event like World War II to change really anything beyond the marginal. Every once in a while, you have a figure like Teddy Roosevelt who's actually able to take peacetime presidency and transform the country, but it needs an extraordinary individual to get something like that done. So the question around the Essence of Decision was the theory behind the Cuban Missile Crisis of how Kennedy arrived at his